And welcome back to the NFLandU Podcast. I'm your host, as always, Hayden Vassar. It's a Friday, January 24th. And we have a very unique show for all of you today who've tuned in. No previews or recaps. I know that's kind of not how we've done things, but that's what we're doing today. Not a single preview in sight. I made sure of it. We're just going to be talking about stuff. Just talk about stuff, What stuff you might ask? Well, we're going to get to some news here in a second. Then we'll talk about the Senior Bowl because, we're getting close to draft time, people. We've got to start learning names here. And then we'll end things with talking about the Pro Bowl towards the end of the show. So that's it for the slate today. That's all we're going to talk about today. So why not let's get into the news, shall we? Hop, skippity-doo over to the news. Let's start first with news with the biggest story of the week. If you haven't heard by now, the news broke about Wednesday early evening, if I remember correctly, when it started popping up on Twitter, that Giants quarterback Eli Manning would be announcing his retirement from the NFL after 16 seasons on Friday today at a press conference. And the press conference just wrapped up a bit over an hour ago, I think. If I'm looking at my clock right, it's about 12:34 now. Yeah, about an hour ago. At the press conference, Eli said, Willington Mara, this is a quote from Eli, Willington Mara always said, once a Giant, always a Giant. For me, it's only a Giant. It's a very nice touch, isn't it? There were a bunch of former Giant players on hand. I know Phil Simms was there. A couple of wide receivers that played with Eli were there. Giants owner was there. I know Tom Coughlin was there as well. Giants owner was there. He also announced that Eli would be inducted into the team's Ring of Honor soon, and that his number and jersey are going to be retired, which means no New York Giant will ever wear the number 10 again. It's a pretty prestigious honor for Eli Manning, isn't it? Let's go in the way back machine, shall we? Eli was originally drafted number 1 overall by the then San Diego Chargers in 2004. But he let it be known to the organization that he didn't want to play in San Diego. He wanted to play in New York. So the Giants ended up taking Phillip Rivers at quarterback at number 4. A deal was quickly worked out between the two, and the Giants swapped Phillip Rivers and some picks for Eli Manning. And then that kick-started one of the most ridiculous rides of a quarterback career that I think we have ever seen, ever. Whether you like Eli or don't, these 16 years have just been bonkers, haven't they? There's no other way to get around it. Eli retires with 57,063 passing yards. 57,063 passing yards. That's 7th all-time. That's pretty good, isn't it? And 366 career passing touchdowns. That's also 7th all-time. So there you go. He also threw 244 career interceptions, so a pretty good touchdown-interception ratio. And 117 to 117 career record as a starter. I know his his overall record in terms of games that he was on the team that they won or lost is better, but in terms of a starter, it's right at 500. He's also a 4-time Pro Bowler, a 2-time Super Bowl champion, and 2-time Super Bowl MVP in 2007 and 2011. And as I say that, I literally have the highlight reel of the 2007 Super Bowl playing on my TV right now when they upended the the then undefeated Patriots in the Super Bowl. He was also the 2016 NFL Walter Payton Man of the Year award winner. That's a very prestigious honor. And Eli also holds a very interesting distinction. While it's not an award for anything he did, Eli Manning's the only quarterback to ever beat Tom Brady in multiple Super Bowls. He was nicknamed the Patriot Killer for a reason, people. For whatever reason, Eli Manning had the magic touch. And on top of all of that, Eli was responsible for one of the, in my opinion, the greatest play in NFL history. The David Tyree helmet catch in the Super Bowl to beat the undefeated Patriots. In my opinion, I don't care what you want to put up against that. That's the greatest play in NFL history. So he also has that as well. You name all of this, and you go on and on and on about this, and it's easy to see why people think he can be a Hall of Famer. And the debate over whether he'll be in the Hall of Fame will rage on for the next few years. I mean, 5 years from now is when he becomes eligible to be voted in, and the debate will rage long after that. I see Twitter is just devolving into arguments whether he should or shouldn't be put in, and people saying he shouldn't be put in, but he's probably going to get in. But I think we should take a different step at talking about Eli Manning. Let's take a step back and just appreciate the absolute absurdity and wild ride these 16 years were with Eli Manning. It wasn't always great. Heck, part of the time it wasn't even good or average. But you know what? It was fun, though. It was a wild ride that had the highest of highs and some pretty damn low lows. But it was fun. I think that's what we should be talking about. Is that this was one of the best, not best, but just more unique and curious quarterback careers ever. It was a wild ride these last 16 years for Eli, the Giants organization, and all of us that were lucky enough to witness it. It was truly something interesting to behold. He was a model of consistency for that entire organization and a pillar in that community for so very long. And all around, just kind of pretty much a good guy. I mean, you put this very kind of mild-mannered, soft-spoken, laid-back guy, and you stick him in the New York media market. You kind of expect him to get torn to shreds, but he somehow found a way to weather that storm for nearly 2 decades. I mean, all props to him. So once again, the time has finally come, and Eli Manning, the last of the Mannings, now that you really think about it, the last one, has retired from the NFL after 16 seasons at quarterback for the New York Football Giants, and he will be missed. I know that sounds weird saying it, but he will be missed. That he was just a pillar of consistency for years. I mean, when he took over as starter in 2004, he did not miss a single game due to injury until he was benched in, 2017, when Ben McAdoo was trying to save his job? So think about that. For like 13 years, never missed a single start. That is incredibly hard and difficult to do for any player at any position. But Eli did it. Just a model of consistency throughout his entire career. And when he's gone, we're going to wonder where he went. So once again, Eli Manning retiring as quarterback for the New York Football Giants. So one last little bit of news, and this one happened on Thursday. All right? It was announced on Thursday for the Minnesota Vikings that Gary Kubiak, who is part of that coaching staff last season, would be promoted to offensive coordinator in Minnesota. Now remember, after Kevin Stefanski left, he was their offensive coordinator. He went over to Cleveland to take the head coaching job. I wondered, who is going to step up? Who are they going to hire? It's going to leave a lot of question marks around the Vikings organization. And they went out and got Gary Kubiak. Now, I know it's not a big splash move. It's not sexy. It's not going to get a lot of headlines or a lot of people talking. But this is actually a very solid move for the Vikings, in my opinion. And here's why. Because what Kubiak likes to do, in terms of how he schemes offenses and what he does, is what Mike Zimmer wants from an offense, the Vikings head coach, in my opinion. If you tell me a team is running a Gary Kubiak-led offense, here's what I would be expecting to see from that offense. A lot of runs, a lot of play-action passes, and a couple of bootlegs to keep the defense honest. That sound familiar at all? To anybody? It should, because that kind of sounds like what the Vikings were doing a lot last season with Kevin Stefanski calling the plays. In fact, in my opinion, that's when Kirk Cousins was at his best this past season, when he was utilizing that play-action passing. So, I think this is a very solid move. It's a good step in a solid direction for the Vikings. Like I said, it's not sexy. It's not big time. You're not going to get a bunch of headlines written about you thinking, oh, the Vikings got Kubiak. They're going to the championship. You're not going to get that. But this was a solid move. I don't want to say it keeps the status quo, because when you say that, it's usually a negative connotation. But the Vikings think that they can do it with their offense. They have the talent, and you bring in Kubiak, who's going to run a similar style system. So I would expect the Vikings to be more in line with what they were last year, not bring in a whole bunch of newness, if that makes any sense. And, next season, as we talked about after the it wasn't after, I think it was right before they played the Saints when we talked about it. This upcoming season is kind of a make or break year for the Minnesota Vikings. You got Kirk Cousins' contracts coming up, and Mike Zimmer, your head coach, his deal is coming up soon too. Decisions are going to be made here pretty quick about this organization. So having Kubiak in to be a steady presence for that offense could be exactly what the doctor ordered for the Vikings. And, Kubiak has head coaching experience. Remember, he won the Super Bowl in 2015 with the Broncos as their head coach. So it can help lend something, I guess. I'm not sure. I'm just rambling at this point. So that's it for news. So without further ado, let's talk about the Senior Bowl, shall we? This Saturday, I think it's around 2 or 3 Eastern, the Reese's Senior Bowl, sponsored by Reese's Peanut Butter Cups. Please give me money. Senior Bowl is taking place in Mobile, Alabama. I know, big time. Mobile, yeah. And it's the first big date of the draft schedule, in my opinion. Now, I can already hear you. I know what you're thinking. What's the point in caring about the Senior Bowl? It's not a real game, so what does it matter? Why should I watch it? Well, I'll tell you why. You ready for this? Giants general manager Dave Gettleman said that the organization first fell in love with Daniel Jones at last year's Senior Bowl. And what did they end up doing? They end up drafting him in the first round at the draft. And he ends up being their starting quarterback now and replacing Eli Manning. And on top of that, going back a few years further, when the Cowboys were at the Senior Bowl with their coaching staff, you know who was on the opposing team at the Senior Bowl as one of the quarterbacks? It was Dak Prescott. Cowboys got their first live look at Prescott at the Senior Bowl. And what did they end up doing? They draft him in the 4th round of the draft that very same year. What I'm saying is that these Senior Bowl workouts and game could go a fair amount in helping these players get drafted. So while, it is a game, but the score doesn't matter and neither do the results. None of that really matters. We're just watching how these players perform in a game, all this, that, and therefore. So while all of that doesn't matter, you're just here to see how these players do. So what I would like to do for this segment is go through a couple different aspects of both the players and coaching staffs, because there's 2 coaching staffs we need to know. And that way, in a few months, when the draft happens, we can look back and say, hey, remember when insert name here was on that coach's coaching staff during the Senior Bowl, and now that team is drafting him right now? Crazy. It's a coincidence. So let's get into it, shall we? So, if you never watched the Senior Bowl, here's how it works. There's 2 teams. You got the North team and the South team. Usually, the coaching staffs for the 2 teams are the NFL coaching staffs of the 2 worst teams in the league. So that would be the Bengals, who are the South team. So head coach Zach Taylor will be coaching the South team. And that would mean that the Washington football team would be the North team. Well, if your team has had a coaching turnover before the Senior Bowl, that i.e. like a head coach getting fired, then you don't get to participate in the Senior Bowl. And it goes to the next lowest team on the totem pole, which means the Washington football team doesn't get to coach, but the Detroit Lions do, because they are the 3rd worst record in the league. So that means Matt Patricia, the head coach of the Lions, will be manning the North team. So, and this is kind of important because the Bengals have the 1st overall pick and the Lions have the 3rd overall pick. Just keep that in mind. All right? So let's start with the North, Matt Patricia squad. So I think the best way to start is quarterback. And a name if you're paying attention to draft, stuff like I always do. You've heard this name lately. Jordan Love, quarterback, Utah State. I've pegged this kid as a potential riser in the draft, and that's how everybody's talking about him, because we're still trying to figure out the pecking order between, the top guys. We're all assuming Joe Burrow's going to go number 1, and then after that, we're assuming it's going to be Tua to Miami at 5, and then after that, we think it's going to be Herbert. But then after that, after those 3 names, what's the pecking order in quarterbacks? I think Jordan Love can make a serious case to be a riser to get into that top 5 and be a guy who could maybe get drafted in the first round. A mobile type quarterback that can throw well and, like I said, mobile. And with the rise of quarterbacks like Lamar Jackson and Patrick Mahomes, maybe more teams are more keen on a guy who is mobile and maybe not the best passer in the world. For instance, Lamar isn't going to, I don't want to say it in a mean way, he's not the greatest passer. His strength is his run game. So maybe more teams are going to be open to the idea of taking quarterbacks whose maybe passing isn't their strongest suit, but running is, if that makes any sense. So Jordan Love, one of the quarterbacks for the North team, there's like 3 or 4 of them. They're going to be changed throughout the game. But that's one of the players for the North team to keep an eye on. Next up, also on the North team, Michael Pittman Jr., wide receiver out of USC. Now, Pittman had a very interesting final year at USC. If you didn't watch any college football and you didn't watch any USC football games, they dealt with a horrendous injury bug at the quarterback position. I mean, it felt like every other week they were starting a new kid at quarterback because the other ones just kept getting hurt. Now you're thinking, why are you talking about quarterbacks when we're talking about this one wide receiver? Here's why. Because this one wide receiver, Michael Pittman Jr., continued to put up solid numbers despite this constant turnover at the quarterback position. Guys kept going out. Michael Pittman kept putting up numbers. Now, I think that's an important distinction. That despite this, continued drop-off from the guy passing the ball, Michael Pittman stayed solid. I think that can show organizations that, hey, even if you don't have your quarterback situation figured out and you're still working things out, Pittman can come in and still be productive. That you don't have to have this world-class passer for Michael Pittman Jr. to be successful, if that makes any sense. So that's another name to keep an eye on, Michael Pittman Jr., wide receiver out of USC. All right, and last name up for the North squad that I wanted to keep an eye on, James Proche. I'm probably butchering that name. James Proche, wide receiver out of SMU. Once again, if you didn't watch college football this year, then you don't know that SMU, the little, school out of Dallas, experienced a renaissance in college football this year. Thanks to head coach Sonny Dykes instituting that air raid offense, it finally took effect. And one of the main ringleaders of that was James. With his style of play fitting perfectly into that offense. And with more and more of the college game, slowly seeping into the pros, you see it with what the Cardinals are doing with Kyler Murray. Why not go get someone like Proche, who was pretty good at what that college game was? If you didn't watch SMU, you don't know that they love to put up points. Put up points in bunches, through the air, all through passes. And it is certainly beautiful to watch. So James Proche, one of the wide receivers to keep an eye on. So that's a couple names from the North squad. All right, 3 names from the North. And I got a couple from the South that's worth keeping an eye on. And the South has the biggest name at the Senior Bowl, in my opinion. Quarterback Justin Herbert. We just talked about him a couple minutes ago. Quarterback out of Oregon. Herbert is a straight-up pocket passer. Almost a prototypical pocket passer, you could say. He'll have a couple throws every game that'll just leave you breathless in a good way, thinking, wow, that is just perfect on-the-dot money. And if you've watched him, you would also know that there's a couple times he'll make a couple passes that leave you breathless in a bad way. Like, what were you doing there, buddy? Depending on, we talked about Tua. Depending on how healthy Tua is, maybe he's not as healthy as people seem to think he's going to be. Justin Herbert, could be the second quarterback off the board. I think he's either going to be the second or the third. But he's definitely going to be a top 10 pick. So how he performs at the Senior Bowl could go a long way. in determining that. Especially, the Lions are sitting there at third. Matthew Stafford's not getting any younger, and he's suffered back injuries the last 2 seasons. Maybe they could fall in love with Justin Herbert at the Senior Bowl. I mean, we've seen crazier things. Who knows? I mean, it's just something to keep an eye on. So, staying in the quarterback room, they also have another very interesting quarterback on the roster, the South team does. Jalen Hurts out of Oklahoma. Yeah, I know. Their quarterback room is loaded, ain't it? Hurts possesses something that can't be taught, in my opinion. Pure leadership. If you haven't followed college football the last few years, you don't know the story of Jalen Hurts. How he was the starter at Alabama, and his job got taken away from him to go to Tua, and he stayed with the team for a while, was a great teammate and leader, then eventually transferred to Oklahoma and had a really great season with them. They won the Big 12. Just pure leadership that I almost can't even put into words how good he is at that department. In my opinion, some lucky team is going to sit down like the Combine and interview this kid, and they're just going to fall in love with him. He's that good of a leader, in my opinion. They're just going to sit down and start talking, and they're just going to be convinced they have to take him based off that. He's also a tremendous athlete on top of that. I've heard some people say that they feel like he could come in to like what the Ravens are doing on offense, similar to what Lamar Jackson is doing, and run an offense similar to that. They think he's that kind of athlete, that able to run and throw kind of guy. So it'll be interesting to see what teams are thinking about Jalen Hurts going forward closer to the draft. Now, that's it for quarterbacks, but I got a couple wide receivers for you. Colin Johnson, the wide receiver out of Texas, the University of Texas. Johnson did have several injuries his senior season that sidelined him for a few games, but when he was healthy, he showed what he was capable of. Dude is absolutely massive. He's like a skyscraper. If I remember correctly, he's like, 6'6"? Not the fastest guy in the world, but he can go up and get a jump ball or two, if you know what I'm saying. In fact, people liked Colin Johnson so much that towards the beginning of this past college football season, people were already talking about him as a guy who could potentially be the first wide receiver off the board. That's how much people liked him then. Now, granted, things have changed and that idea has been tampered, but it just shows you that what people thought about him at one point, that he has that kind of talent, despite all the injuries. Now, another name up, also from the University of Texas, Devon Duvernay, wide receiver. With Johnson sidelined for, large chunks of the season for the Longhorns, Devon Duvernay was the main culprit in stepping up and helping that offense be productive. Another big body frame type of guy that can go up and get a couple jump balls. Texas has a chance to have 2 wide receivers taken probably fairly high in the draft. I'm not saying first round. I'm not saying that, but when was the last time, we talked about the Longhorns as an offensive producer in the draft? It's been a very, very long time, but they have a chance to get 2 of their guys drafted this year. So I know I ran through a bunch of names there really fast, but I just wanted to give you a couple names to at least, if you're going to watch the Senior Bowl this Saturday. I know I'll watch part of it, but if you're watching it Saturday and then when we get to the draft in April and you hear those names called, you're thinking, hey, I remember when we were talking about this back in January. It's called being prepared, people. But did you notice something while we were talking about all those names? Did you notice something specific? We talked about a lot of wide receivers, didn't we? There's a reason for that. Because this 2020 wide receiver class coming up for this draft looks to be the deepest that we've had in years. I follow a couple different draft guys on Twitter and listen to a bunch of different shows and podcasts. They've been hyping up this wide receiver class, I kid you not, for 2 years. And it looks to be as deep as they promised it would be. You got guys coming out the wazoo. So if you're a team that needs a wide receiver, and guess what? There is a fair amount in this league that could really, really use an upgrade at wide receiver. This is your year. And in fact, I think they're going to start going early and often in this draft this year. So be on the lookout for that. So That's it for the Senior Bowl. Let's move on to our last bit of business. We're going to talk about the Pro Bowl. Yeah, let's get jacked, people. Pro Bowl. Yeah, I know it's exciting. Now, I can already hear you again. I can already hear that complainer again that dogged the Senior Bowl. I hear you. Oh, who cares about the Pro Bowl? Nobody watches that. Well, you're right. Oh, yeah, I know. It feels weird. You're right. Nobody watches the Pro Bowl, do they? Not a single one. And it's a problem. It's been a problem for years. Pro Bowl viewership has been declining for years, and they have been trying new gimmicks every year to get people to tune in and watch. Like, remember a couple years ago, I think it was like 2014, they put former players in as coaches and they did a full draft of regardless of conference, where you had a couple AFC and NFC players on each team, and it was Team Dion versus Team Michael Irvin. And it was interesting that first year. I think we had like a pretty close game. But then after that, it yielded results that really weren't that great. And it went back to the usual AFC versus NFC, all-star format. Now, that isn't to say that the Pro Bowl isn't trying something new this year, because they are, as they announced, 2 rule changes for this game only. Like, think of it like a test run. It's like an experimental ground where these rule changes will only be in effect for this game. The most prominent of which revolves around kickoffs. As there won't be any kickoffs. If I'm to understand this rule correctly, there will not be a single kickoff in this game. Except for like the start and end of first half. If I'm to understand it. So, think of it like this. When a team scores, whether it's a field goal or a touchdown, it does not matter which. If a team scores any points, they have a few options on what to do. They can either give the other team the ball at their 25-yard line, so they would start at their 25-yard line, their drive, and have to go the length of the field. Or they could go with the second option. They can spot the ball at the same 25-yard line, and the scoring team can attempt a 4th and 15 play. And you're thinking, why would they do that? Well, here's why. If they convert the first down on that 4th down play, then that team gets to keep the ball. So the scoring team that just scored, if they convert that 4th down, they would keep the ball and get a brand new drive. If they don't, it would be considered a turnover, and the ball would be spotted for the opposing team at the dead ball spot. I know that sounded very confusing, and I probably didn't explain it the best, so if you're still confused, please just look it up later and read it a couple times. It took me like 5 times reading it before it finally clicked for me. But anyway, so that's the main one. They're experimenting with kickoffs, not doing kickoffs and all this and that. And that's a good thing. They're trying to cut down on concussions, and the main culprit of concussions is usually kickoffs anyway. So they're trying to keep player safety in mind. And the second rule has to do with false starting and receivers when they're set for a second after they, shift and motion and all that. So those are the 2 rule changes, all right? And this could actually be a good thing. Not the rules themselves, but the idea of implementing rule changes for the Pro Bowl only. You could sell the Pro Bowl as kind of like an experimental ground where you try out these new ideas and present them to owners at the ownership meetings when you vote on changing them. It could spice things up, create some like uncertainty, like how is this going to work? How is that going to work? Get viewership to come in just on the idea of the unknown. I should say, sell the unknown to people, if that makes any sense. If they decide to, do this experimental thing every single year. Now, here's what I think what the problem with the Pro Bowl is. It's the on-field product. I think we can all universally agree it's the on-field product, because the games are never good. Guys are out there not trying. The score is always like 45 to like 20, and nobody's really caring. But I know why, they're not really trying. Football is an inherently violent game. It takes a massive toll on the human body every single week. And guys don't want to go out and get hurt in a meaningless game, because that's what this is. It's a very meaningless game. There are no stakes. I mean, I think there's like a small bonus if your team wins, but I mean, when you're already making millions, what's like an extra $5,000? You know what I'm saying? So it's a meaningless game and guys don't want to get hurt. I fully 100 billion% get that. I really, really do. Unlike what the other leagues do, like, for instance, MLB, their All-Star game is in the middle of the year, but the winning side in the All-Star game, whether it's like, the American League or the National League, that side gets home field advantage in the World Series. So they make their All-Star game worth something and meaningful, if that makes any sense. Now, that means something, don't it? It really does mean something. Now, the NFL is at a disadvantage because they are the only professional league in North America where their All-Star game is at the end of the season. Think about it. All the other major leagues, MLB, NBA, NHL, MLS, all of them, every single All-Star game, middle of the season. Every single one of them. Now, I think NBA's is like a little past the halfway point, but it's close enough for argument's sake. The NFL's at a disadvantage. Therein lies the problem. It's hard to build in stakes in a game that's at the end of the year. It's very difficult to make it matter when, everything's already done. There's nothing left to fight for. So I have an idea, and we're just going to float it. It's not like a major earth-shattering idea, but it's an idea. We're going to steal a page from the MLB playbook. Just like the Astros steal signs. Boom! Baseball burn. 2 weeks in a row. How about that? So here's my idea, all right? The winning side of the Pro Bowl will determine the home versus away distinction for the following week's Super Bowl. Does that make sense? So, let's use this year for example. Let's say that in the Pro Bowl, the AFC team wins 34-20, okay? That means in this year's Super Bowl, the AFC team, which is the Chiefs, would be considered the home team. Does that make sense? And that the 49ers would be declared the away team. See, it seems simple, right? Because the way they do it is where it's like, if it's an odd-numbered Super Bowl, then the AFC team is the home team. They get way too weird and clunky with it. Why not make it interesting? Why not have some stakes in it? I know it's not like big, shattering earth, rumbling stakes anyway. But, maybe, some teams will play better if they're considered the home team in a neutral site game anyway. It's better than nothing. It's better than what they have now. Because I do think the Pro Bowl is important. Maybe not the game itself, but the distinction of at least being voted a Pro Bowler, in my opinion, is important. For some guys, their contracts are incentive-based, and making the Pro Bowl could mean an extra few $1,000s. Or maybe even $1 million in some cases. A lot of contracts are incentive-based in the NFL these days. Or in terms of legacies. Guys having gone to multiple Pro Bowls could potentially help those guys get into the Hall of Fame someday. Being a Pro Bowler isn't the be-all, end-all in the NFL. But remember last week, I think it was last week, when we talked about all those Hall of Fame players being inducted? Do you remember how many of those dudes went to multiple Pro Bowls? Almost exclusively every single one. So I do think in terms of legacies, these things can be important, and at least the honor of being voted a Pro Bowler is nice. So I do think it's important, and hopefully one day everyone can actually look forward to the Pro Bowl. Maybe not as a big time, oh yeah, it's Pro Bowl time, baby. But, maybe not to the point where we are now where we're like, oh, the Pro Bowl's this weekend. I might as well find something to do with my free time. Because that's really where we're at now. So, that's all we have for today's show. I know we went through a lot of that fast, but we covered a fair amount. Senior Bowl, Pro Bowl news, all this and that. But I think our show is going to be similar to this in the off season, where we're just talking about stuff, and the shows are going to be a lot shorter. So this was a nice little experimental run, because there's really not going to be a lot to talk about in the off season. Spoiler alert. It's usually how things go. Now, next week is Super Bowl week. Yay! Super Bowl week. I'm so pumped. It's going to be a great game. I'm so excited. So expect wall-to-wall coverage from every single network about the Super Bowl. and analyzing every tiny little insignificant detail of everything. Like, when they get to media day, they're just going to have wall-to-wall coverage of these running backs talking for 5 hours. It's going to be a bit much at times. And so here's what we're going to do. At the NFLandU Podcast, we're going to do things a little different than how everybody else is doing it. Okay? We'll talk about the Super Bowl a little bit on Monday, just a little bit. And we will also debut a new segment to fill airtime. Then on Friday, we're really going to do a deep dive. We're going to have a Super Bowl extravaganza show, a super duper Super Bowl show. Say that 5 times fast. Super duper Super Bowl show. I'm so stupid. Where we will go all out. All right, we're going to go all out next Friday. What does that mean? I don't even know what it means. I just wrote it down and it sounded good, so we're going to go all out. You'll just have to tune in and find out what it means next Friday. So, thanks for stopping by. Hope everybody enjoys the Senior Bowl and Pro Bowl this weekend, and I'll talk to you all Monday. Bye.